Deep in the heart of British Columbia's pristine wilderness, where towering pine trees touch the sky and morning mist dances between ancient trunks, an extraordinary story unfolded that would touch hearts worldwide. Just outside the sleepy coastal town of Prince Rupert, where fishing boats gently bob in the harbor and the smell of salt air mingles with pine, nature was about to showcase its most unexpected side. The story begins on a crisp spring morning when the sun had barely peeked over the mountain tops. The kind of morning where your breath turns to fog and the dew makes everything shimmer like diamonds. Old train tracks, now rarely used, cut through the forest like a rusty scar from a bygone era. These tracks had seen countless stories over the years, but none quite like this one. Local wildlife observers had grown familiar with a particular grizzly bear over the years. A magnificent creature, she stood over 7 feet tall when on her hind legs, with fur the color of honey touched by sunlight. They'd watched her grow from a curious young bear into a gentle giant, known for her unusually calm demeanor. The previous spring, she'd given birth to 2 cubs, and watching her teach them about their forest home had become a favorite pastime for the local wildlife community. That morning started like any other for the bear. She emerged from the forest's shadows, her massive paws leaving prints in the morning dew as she led her cubs on their daily foraging journey. The cubs tumbled and played behind her, still learning the ways of their world. Everything seemed normal until she approached the old train tracks. The sound that caught her attention wasn't one that belonged in her forest. It wasn't the familiar chirp of birds or the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. No, this sound was completely foreign, the desperate cry of a human baby echoing through the misty morning air. The sound carried vulnerability, fear, and a need for help that transcended species. The bear's reaction to this sound would challenge everything we think we know about wild animals. Instead of retreating from this human presence, as every natural instinct would dictate, she did something remarkable. Her ears perked forward, her nose lifted to the air, and she began to move with purpose toward the sound. Her cubs, sensing the change in their mother's behavior, stopped their play and watched curiously. They stayed back in the safety of the tree line, their small heads tilted in confusion as their mother approached something they'd been taught to avoid, signs of human presence. The morning light was growing stronger now, cutting through the mist in golden beams, illuminating a scene that seemed more like a fairy tale than reality. The massive grizzly, moving with surprising gentleness for a creature of her size, approached the source of the cries. Her powerful nose led her right to the train tracks, where something small and completely out of place lay between the cold metal rails. The wildlife observers who regularly tracked this bear would later say that in all their years of studying these magnificent creatures, they'd never seen anything like what happened next. This moment would not only change how we view these powerful animals, but would also remind us that compassion knows no boundaries. As the bear drew closer to the tracks, her movements became even more careful, more deliberate. The morning mist began to lift, revealing a sight that would soon capture the attention of people around the world. There, vulnerable and alone on the cold metal tracks, lay a tiny bundle that would connect 2 worlds in a way nobody could have predicted. The remarkable events that followed would challenge our understanding of wild animals and remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of kindness come from the most unexpected sources. What happened in those next few moments would not only save a life, but would also change forever how we view the relationship between humans and the wild creatures we share our world with. This was just the beginning of a story that would touch millions of hearts, inspire countless conversations about wildlife conservation, and remind us all that in moments of true need, the boundaries between species can dissolve in the most beautiful ways. The gentle giant of the forest was about to show the world that sometimes the most powerful acts of love come from the most unexpected places. The story that unfolded on those rusty train tracks would soon spread far beyond the misty forests of British Columbia, touching hearts and challenging preconceptions across the globe. But in that moment, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, none of that mattered to the bear. All that existed was the sound of a tiny cry for help and an instinct that transcended the natural order of things. As the morning mist began to clear, the true nature of what lay on those cold train tracks became heartbreakingly clear. There, between the rusted rails, lay a tiny baby, no more than 6 months old, wrapped in nothing but a thin yellow blanket that seemed to glow against the dark metal of the tracks. The sight was enough to stop anyone's heart. A helpless infant, abandoned in one of the most dangerous and remote locations imaginable. The blanket, though clearly once warm and soft, had grown damp from the morning dew. It was the kind you might find in any nursery, decorated with little ducks that had almost faded away from countless washes. But here, in the wilderness, it seemed terribly inadequate against the harsh spring weather that had gripped the region overnight. The temperature had dropped dangerously low during the dark hours, leaving frost on the surrounding vegetation. Small patches of ice still clung to the shadowy sides of the train tracks, a chilling reminder of just how cold it had been. The baby's cries, though strong enough to attract the bed's attention, showed signs of weakening, a worrying indication of how long the little one had been exposed to these harsh conditions. The mystery of how this tiny soul ended up here would become a question that would haunt the local community for years to come. The nearest town was miles away, and the train tracks hadn't seen regular service in months. The only road access was a logging path nearly 2 miles from this spot, making it clear that whoever left the baby here had gone to great lengths to choose this isolated location. The local police would later piece together what little evidence they could find. A single footprint in the mud, partially washed away by the morning dew, a torn piece of paper with illegible writing, a blue ribbon that had blown into the nearby bushes. Each clue would tell part of a story, but never the whole truth. The investigation would bring more questions than answers, leaving a mystery that would fuel countless conversations and theories in the years to come. The baby's clothing gave few clues to their origin, a simple white onesie now soiled and damp, and tiny wool socks that had somehow managed to stay on their feet. No identification, no note, no explanation for this heartbreaking abandonment. It was as if the child had simply appeared there, like a character from an old fairy tale, waiting to be discovered by fate. The timing of it all seemed almost miraculous. Had the bear not come along her usual morning route, had she chosen a different path that day, the outcome could have been tragically different. The next train wasn't scheduled for days, but the cold alone posed a severe threat. The baby's survival through the night was already remarkable, a testament to human resilience even in our smallest and most vulnerable moments. Local weather records would later show that the temperature had dipped to near freezing overnight. The wind chill, whipping through the valley between the mountains, made it feel even colder. How the infant survived those dark hours would amaze medical experts who would later examine the case. They would talk about the remarkable ability of young bodies to adapt, about the thin line between tragedy and miracle. The morning sun, now climbing higher in the sky, cast long shadows through the trees, creating a stark contrast between light and dark. The baby's cries echoed through this natural cathedral, bouncing off the ancient trunks of towering pines and reaching into the depths of the forest. It was a sound that spoke to something primordial, a call for help that transcended species and stirred something deep in the heart of the massive bear who stood watching. The bear's cubs remained at the edge of the forest, their curious eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Their mother's behavior was unlike anything they'd learned in their young lives. Everything they knew about survival in the wild told them to avoid human sounds and scents, yet here was their mother, drawn to this strange, small creature in a way they couldn't understand. The frost was beginning to melt around the tracks as the day warmed, creating a gentle mist that rose from the ground like nature's own blanket. The baby's cries grew slightly stronger in the warmth of the sun, perhaps sensing that they were no longer alone. It was a moment suspended in time, a massive predator and a tiny human child, brought together by circumstance and something far more powerful than natural instinct. What happened in the next few moments would challenge everything we think we know about wild animals, maternal instinct, and the bonds that can form between species. The bear's response to finding this abandoned child would not only save a life, but would also remind us all that compassion can come from the most unexpected sources in the most unexpected ways. The scene was set for something extraordinary, a moment that would soon capture the world's attention and remind us all that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that seem the most unlikely. As the bear moved closer to the tracks, her enormous form blocking out the morning sun, nobody could have predicted the remarkable chain of events that was about to unfold. What happened next would leave even the most experienced wildlife experts speechless. the massive grizzly bear. A creature known for its fierce power and natural instinct to avoid human contact did something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about wild animals. Instead of retreating from the unfamiliar sound and scent of a human baby, she moved forward with a gentleness that seemed impossible for an animal of her size. The bear's own story played a crucial role in what was about to unfold. Just 3 months earlier, she had given birth to 2 cubs who now watched curiously from the forest's edge. The experience of motherhood had awakened something in her, a protective instinct that, on this extraordinary morning, would extend far beyond her own species. Wildlife experts who later studied footage of the encounter would point out fascinating details in the bear's body language. Her ears, usually alert for danger, remained in a relaxed position. Her movements, typically powerful and commanding, became surprisingly delicate. Most remarkably, her eyes, which normally wouldn't focus directly on anything human, remained fixed on the tiny bundle between the rails. The morning air was filled with a mix of scents: the dampness of early spring, the metallic tang of the railroad tracks, and the unfamiliar smell of human presence. For any wild animal, especially a mother with cubs, these human scents should have triggered an immediate retreat. But something stronger was at work here, something that transcended natural instincts and spoke to a deeper understanding of vulnerability and need. As she approached the tracks, her massive paws made surprisingly little noise on the gravel. Each step was careful, measured, as if she understood the delicacy of the situation. Her cubs, still watching from a safe distance, tilted their heads in confusion. Everything they had learned about survival in their short lives told them to stay away from human sounds and smells, yet here was their mother, breaking every rule they knew. The baby's cries had grown weaker now, perhaps from exhaustion or the cold, but they continued to pull at something deep within the bear's nature. Those who study animal behavior would later suggest that the high-pitched sounds might have reminded her of her own cub's distress calls. The pitch and desperation in those tiny cries spoke a language that all mothers, regardless of species, seemed to understand. The bear's own maternal experience had been a remarkable one. Local wildlife observers had watched her care for her cubs over the previous months, noting her exceptional patience and gentleness with them. She had shown unusual tolerance, even when her cubs tested her patience, a trait that was now extending to this most unexpected situation. What made her actions even more remarkable was the time of year. Spring in British Columbia is a challenging season for bears, as they've recently emerged from hibernation and are usually focused entirely on finding food and protecting their young. Natural instinct should have driven her to avoid anything unusual or potentially dangerous, especially with her own cubs to protect. The morning sun now illuminated the scene fully, casting long shadows across the tracks. The bear's massive form, usually intimidating, seemed almost protective as she drew closer to the tiny bundle. Her movements became even more deliberate, each step calculated with a precision that seemed impossible for such a large creature. The contrast between the two beings could not have been more striking: a tiny human infant, completely helpless, and one of nature's most powerful predators, capable of taking down large prey with a single swipe of her paw. Yet in this moment, that strength was transformed into something entirely different, a gentle, nurturing presence that defied all expectations. Local wildlife experts would later explain that bears, particularly females with cubs, possess a level of intelligence and emotional complexity that many people don't realize. They're capable of reading situations and responding with surprising sensitivity. But what was happening here went beyond anything documented in their years of research. The bear's breath came out in visible puffs in the cool morning air as she drew closer to the tracks. Her nose worked constantly, taking in every detail of the situation through scent. Bears rely heavily on their sense of smell to understand their world, and right now, every instinct would have told her that this was a human situation, something to avoid at all costs. But maternal instinct proved stronger than fear or natural avoidance. The bear's behavior in these moments would later be studied by wildlife biologists around the world, who would use this extraordinary encounter to reshape our understanding of animal consciousness and emotional capacity. The next few moments would prove that sometimes the greatest acts of compassion come from the most unexpected sources. As the bear made her final approach to the abandoned infant, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what this magnificent creature would do next. What happened in those crucial moments would not only save a life, but would also change forever how we view the relationship between humans and wild animals. The rescue that unfolded on those train tracks would soon become a story that people would tell their children for generations to come. With a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of her size, the mother bear approached the tiny bundle lying between the cold metal rails. Her movements were so careful, so precise, that it almost appeared as if she was walking on tiptoe, despite her enormous weight. The baby's cries had grown softer now, more like whimpers, as the cold morning air continued to bite. The thin yellow blanket offered little protection against the elements, and time was becoming increasingly precious. What happened next would leave even the most skeptical observers in tears. Using her teeth with the same delicate precision she used to carry her own cubs, the bear gently gripped the edge of the blanket. The fabric was damp from the morning dew, but she managed to get a firm yet gentle hold. With movements that showed remarkable understanding of the situation's delicacy, she began to slowly, carefully drag the bundle away from the dangerous metal rails. Her own cubs watched from their safe distance, occasionally standing on their hind legs to get a better view of what their mother was doing. Their curious eyes followed every movement, and they seemed to understand that something extraordinary was happening. They had seen their mother carry them this way before, but this was different. This was something entirely new in their young lives. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting warm light through the trees and onto the scene below. The bear's fur glowed almost golden in the sunlight as she worked, creating an almost magical atmosphere around this incredible rescue. Each movement was calculated, each step precise, as she moved the precious bundle to safety. Once the baby was clear of the tracks, the bear did something even more remarkable. Instead of retreating to a safe distance, she lay down beside the tiny human, curling her massive body around the small bundle. Her thick fur, designed to protect against the harsh mountain winters, now became a shield against the cold morning air. The warmth from her body began to seep through the damp blanket, providing the kind of heat that the baby desperately needed. The position she chose wasn't random. She placed herself between the baby and the direction of the wind, using her bulk as a windbreak. It was the same protective position she used with her own cubs during cold nights, a natural instinct that she was now extending to this tiny human child. Her breath, warm and steady, created a small pocket of heated air around the bundle. Wildlife experts would later explain that bears maintain a body temperature similar to humans, making her warmth perfect for helping the cold infant. The thick layers of fat and fur that helped her survive winter months now served a different purpose, keeping a human baby alive in desperate circumstances. Her cubs, growing bolder with curiosity, took a few steps closer but maintained their cautious distance. They were learning something that day that no one could have taught them, a lesson about compassion that transcended the natural order of things. Their mother's unexpected behavior was showing them that sometimes the rules of the wild can bend in extraordinary circumstances. The baby's cries began to change, becoming less desperate and more settled. The warmth from the bear's body was clearly having an effect, providing the comfort and heat that the infant so desperately needed. The bear remained perfectly still, only moving to occasionally adjust her position to better shield the child from the wind. Time seemed to stand still in the forest. The usual morning sounds, birds calling, small animals rustling through the underbrush, continued around them, but at the center of it all was this incredible scene of nurturing and protection. The massive predator had transformed into a gentle guardian, defying every natural instinct to provide care for a creature that should have been nothing more than a strange curiosity to her. The contrast between the bear's enormous size and the tiny bundle she protected was striking. Her paw alone was larger than the entire baby, yet she showed such incredible control and gentleness. She occasionally turned her head to check on the bundle, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid startling the now calming infant. The maternal instinct that drove her to protect her own cubs had expanded in a way that nobody could have predicted. In this moment, she didn't see a human child. She saw a baby in need, and that was all that mattered. The boundaries between species, usually so rigid in the wild, had dissolved in the face of pure compassion. As the morning wore on, the bear maintained her protective position, showing no signs of wanting to leave. She had made a choice that went against everything we think we know about wild animals, and she was committed to seeing it through. What happened next would require human intervention, but for now, in this moment, she was exactly what this abandoned child needed: a protector, a source of warmth, and proof that compassion knows no bounds. The discovery of this extraordinary scene came through the lens of a wildlife photographer who had been tracking this particular bear family for months. The photographer, a quiet man in his 50s who had spent decades documenting wildlife in British Columbia's wilderness, could hardly believe what he was seeing through his camera. His hands trembled as he adjusted his telephoto lens, knowing he was witnessing something unprecedented in his 30 years of wildlife photography. He had arrived at his usual spot just as dawn was breaking, setting up his equipment in the small wooden blind he had built months ago. It was perfectly positioned to observe the bear family's morning routine without disturbing them. The blind, weathered by months of exposure to the elements, had become like a second home to him during his documentation of the bear family. Through his viewfinder, he had originally expected to capture the usual morning activities: the mother bear teaching her cubs to forage, perhaps showing them how to dig for roots or search for berries. Instead, he found himself documenting something that would soon capture the world's attention and challenge everything we think we know about wild animals. His camera clicked rapidly, the sound barely audible in his camouflaged hiding spot. Each frame captured a moment that seemed more incredible than the last: the massive bear approaching the tracks, her gentle retrieval of the bundle, and now her protective position around the tiny human child. The morning light was perfect, casting a golden glow that made each image look almost magical. The photographer's heart raced as he realized the full magnitude of what he was witnessing. With trembling fingers, he reached for his satellite phone, a piece of equipment he carried for emergencies, but had never actually needed to use. This situation, however, demanded immediate action. He knew he had to get help, but he also knew he couldn't make any sudden moves that might startle the bear. As he waited for his call to go through, he continued documenting every moment. His trained eye noticed details that others might miss: the way the bear positioned herself to block the wind, how she occasionally shifted to check on the baby, the curious but cautious behavior of her cubs. Each photo told part of a story that would soon be shared around the world. The local emergency services initially thought he was joking or confused. A bear protecting an abandoned baby? It seemed impossible. But the photographer's reputation for reliability, built over decades of wildlife documentation, made them take the call seriously. He described the scene in careful detail, emphasizing both the urgency of the situation and the delicacy required in any rescue attempt. While waiting for help to arrive, he used his expertise to assess the situation. The bear showed no signs of aggression, quite the opposite. Her body language, which he had studied for months, indicated a calm and protective state. The cubs, usually playful and active in the morning hours, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, staying quiet and watchful at a safe distance. The morning fog had completely lifted now, revealing the full scene in crystal clear detail. The contrast was extraordinary. The enormous brown bear, capable of taking down large prey with a single swipe, now using that same strength with incredible gentleness to protect a tiny human child. His camera continued to capture every moment, recording what would become one of the most remarkable wildlife encounters ever documented. Through his powerful lens, he could see that the baby had stopped crying and appeared to be warming up, thanks to the bear's body heat. The yellow blanket was now clearly visible in the morning light, its cheerful pattern of ducks a stark contrast to the serious situation. The photographer knew these images would tell a story that would touch hearts around the world. Time seemed to move differently as he waited for help to arrive. Every minute felt like an hour as he watched through his lens, documenting this extraordinary interaction. He knew that his photos would be crucial not only for documenting this incredible event, but also for helping people understand the true nature of these often misunderstood animals. The sound of approaching vehicles in the distance made him tense. He knew the next few moments would be crucial. How would the bear react to human presence? Would she stay protective of the baby or flee with her cubs? His fingers remained steady on his camera, ready to document whatever happened next. As the first responders began to arrive, they moved with careful precision, guided by the photographer's detailed instructions transmitted via his satellite phone. His knowledge of the bear's behavior, gained through months of observation, would prove invaluable in the delicate rescue operation that was about to unfold. Looking through his viewfinder, the photographer realized he was documenting more than just an extraordinary animal encounter. He was witnessing a moment that would challenge our understanding of wildlife, maternal instinct, and the bonds that can form across species. His photos would soon touch hearts around the world and become a powerful reminder that compassion knows no boundaries. The rescue operation that unfolded next was unlike anything the emergency responders had ever trained for. As their vehicles approached the scene, they moved with extreme caution, keeping their sirens off and engines quiet. The morning sun was now high in the sky, illuminating a scene that none of them would ever forget. The first to arrive was a team of paramedics, followed closely by local police and wildlife conservation officers. They parked their vehicles at a safe distance, knowing that any sudden noise or movement could drastically change the situation. The photographer's detailed observations and guidance through his satellite phone had been crucial in helping them prepare for what they were about to face. The rescue team gathered quietly behind their vehicles, watching in amazement as the massive bear continued to protect the tiny bundle. Their training had prepared them for almost every emergency situation imaginable, but nothing quite like this. How do you separate a 700-pound grizzly bear from what she has chosen to protect? The wildlife conservation officers took the lead, having the most experience with bear behavior. They had worked with this particular bear before, monitoring her from a distance over the years, but this situation was completely unprecedented. They knew her general temperament, but this was an entirely new scenario that would test everyone's skills and patience. One of the paramedics, a veteran with 20 years of experience, whispered that in all her years of emergency response, she'd never seen anything like this. Through binoculars, she could see that the baby appeared to be moving and had good color, positive signs that gave them hope, but also added pressure to resolve the situation quickly. The rescue team formulated a careful plan. They would need to approach slowly, making their presence known to the bear without startling her. The wildlife officers explained that bears have excellent hearing and an incredible sense of smell. She already knew they were there. The key would be to help her understand they weren't a threat. As they prepared for the approach, the bear's behavior continued to amaze everyone present. She remained calm, occasionally lifting her head to watch the gathering of humans but showing no signs of aggression. Her cubs stayed back in the tree line, their curious eyes taking in everything that was happening. The wildlife officers decided to try something unusual. Instead of using their standard bear deterrent techniques, they would approach as if they were fellow caregivers. They knew from experience that mother bears can sometimes show surprising levels of tolerance when they understand that humans are trying to help. The most experienced wildlife officer took the lead, moving forward at an angle that would be least threatening to the bear. His movements were slow and deliberate, and he kept up a soft, gentle stream of talk, not to communicate with the bear, but to let her grow accustomed to human presence and voice. Behind him, two paramedics followed with their medical gear, ready to check on the baby as soon as possible. What happened next left everyone holding their breath. As the rescue team drew closer, the bear slowly began to move. But instead of becoming defensive or aggressive, she gradually shifted her position. It was almost as if she understood that help had arrived. Her body language remained calm, her movements careful and deliberate. The cubs, watching from their safe distance, made small sounds of concern, but their mother remained focused on the situation at hand. She continued to watch the approaching humans intently, her eyes showing intelligence and what seemed like understanding. The photographer captured every moment, his camera clicking softly in the background. When the rescue team was about 30 feet away, the bear did something extraordinary. She slowly stood up and backed away from the bundle, though she remained close enough to watch. It was as if she was deliberately creating space for the humans to help, while staying near enough to ensure the baby's safety. The paramedics moved in quickly but calmly, their training taking over despite the unusual circumstances. They found the baby was cold but responsive. The bear's body heat had indeed prevented the worst from happening. The infant's cries grew stronger as they began their medical assessment, a sound that made everyone's heart lift with relief. Throughout the medical evaluation, the bear remained nearby, watching intently as the paramedics worked. Her cubs had drawn slightly closer, curiosity seemingly overcoming their natural fear. The wildlife officers maintained their positions, ready to intervene if needed, but the bear's calm demeanor never changed. Finally, as the paramedics prepared to transport the baby to safety, the bear did one last remarkable thing. She made a soft huffing sound to her cubs and slowly began to lead them away into the forest. It was almost as if, seeing that the baby was now in good hands, she knew her work was done. The rescue operation, which everyone had feared might become dangerous, had instead become a powerful demonstration of cross-species cooperation. As the emergency vehicles pulled away with their tiny passenger, the bear and her cubs watched from the edge of the forest, a scene that would be captured in one final incredible photograph. The story of the bear and the abandoned baby didn't end on those train tracks. In many ways, it was just the beginning. The tiny infant, after being rushed to the nearest hospital, made a remarkable recovery. Doctors were amazed at how well the baby had survived the ordeal, crediting the bear's body heat and protection for preventing what could have been a tragedy. The news of this extraordinary rescue spread like wildfire. At first, many people couldn't believe it was real, but the wildlife photographer's incredible images told a story that no one could deny. His photographs appeared in newspapers and magazines worldwide, touching hearts and changing how people viewed these magnificent animals. The small town near where the rescue took place was transformed. Local coffee shops and diners buzzed with conversations about the miracle on the train tracks. People who had lived alongside bears all their lives shared stories of other remarkable encounters they'd witnessed, though none quite like this. The town became known as a place where something magical had happened, where the boundary between wild and human hearts had disappeared for one extraordinary moment. The baby found a loving home with a local family, carefully chosen by social services. The new parents, who had been hoping to adopt for years, saw the story on the news and felt an immediate connection. They understood that their child's story was special, and they embraced the responsibility of keeping the memory of that remarkable rescue alive. The wildlife photographer's images became more than just photographs. They became symbols of hope and compassion. One particular shot, showing the massive bear gently watching over the tiny bundle, won several international awards and was featured in wildlife magazines around the world. But more importantly, it helped change people's perceptions of these often misunderstood animals. The bear and her cubs continued to roam their forest home, occasionally spotted by hikers and wildlife observers. She became something of a local legend, with people traveling from far and wide hoping to catch a glimpse of the guardian bear. Wildlife officials noticed something interesting. In the years that followed, she showed an unusual gentleness whenever she encountered signs of human presence, though she maintained a healthy and appropriate distance. The story inspired real change in the community. Local authorities established the Forest Guardian Wildlife Foundation, dedicated to protecting bears and their habitats. The foundation focused on education, helping people understand these amazing animals and promoting peaceful coexistence between humans and wildlife. School children in the area grew up learning about the bear who saved a baby, and with that story came important lessons about compassion and understanding. The baby's story became a symbol of hope for many. As the years passed, the child grew into a healthy, happy youngster with a special connection to nature. The adoptive parents made sure their child knew the extraordinary story of survival and the unlikely guardian angel who had provided protection when it was needed most. The spot where the rescue took place became a quiet memorial of sorts. Local artists created a beautiful bronze sculpture of a mother bear, placed near the walking trail that ran parallel to the old train tracks. The plaque didn't mention names or specific details, respecting the privacy of all involved, but simply read, "In honor of unexpected guardians and the power of compassion." The wildlife photographer continued his work, though he knew he would never capture anything quite like that morning's events again. His photographs became part of a traveling exhibition called Guardians of the Wild, which helped raise awareness about wildlife conservation and the incredible emotional lives of animals. Scientists who studied the event noted how it challenged our understanding of animal behavior. Research papers were written examining the possibility that maternal instincts could cross species boundaries under extraordinary circumstances. The incident became a reference point in discussions about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. The local community changed too. People began to see the bears in their area differently, not as threats to be feared, but as intelligent, emotional beings deserving of respect and protection. Local businesses even embraced the story, with the town's welcome sign eventually featuring a mother bear and her cubs, symbolizing protection and community. Years later, people still tell the story, though some details have taken on almost mythical qualities in the retelling. But the core truth remains unchanged. On a cold morning in the wilderness, a mother bear's compassion transcended the boundaries of species and taught the world an unforgettable lesson about love and protection. The baby, now growing up with a deep love for nature and wildlife, carries a unique legacy. The child's story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary guardians can appear in the most unexpected forms, and that compassion knows no boundaries. It's a story that continues to touch hearts and change minds, showing us that in moments of true need, the divisions between species can dissolve in the most beautiful and unexpected ways.